I'm Ryan Pack.
And I'm Nicole Barlow.
And this is Soundtrack Your Life, where we talk to a guest about a soundtrack that they feel connected to. Today we are joined by Dina Friedman, who is a producer on the Media Path podcast. Welcome, Dina.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So for our listeners who haven't heard of Media Path, why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
So Media Path podcast is an interview format, sort of conversation, discussion style podcast that is co-hosted by two basically legendary broadcasters from the Los Angeles area. Fritz Coleman, who I think most Angelinos know. I see Nicole raising her
I'm nodding vigorously with excitement. Keep going. Legend. Fritz Coleman is legend.
Yes. So he was the primetime NBC weathercaster for almost 40 years until he retired, kind of right at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. And then Louise Palanker, who is a filmmaker, documentarian, photographer, drummer, the list goes on. And she was also a co-founder of the Premier Radio Networks, which is now a part of iHeartMedia. So Louise, everyone calls her Wheezy. So Fritz and Wheezy talk every week to usually an icon of the entertainment industry. We've had people like Henry Winkler, Keith Morrison, Vicki Lawrence, Ed Begley Jr., Mark Summers. I mean, we're at 128 episodes, so the list is huge. And at the same time as interviewing someone from the entertainment industry who's made a pretty huge mark on the entertainment industry, they also do recommendations, their recommendations for current media offerings, what's streaming, what they've been enjoying in the media. So it's kind of a good mix between the sort of entertainment industry, historical, cultural touchstones that have made such a huge mark on everyone's lives. And then also what's going on now in the media. And we kind of unironically referred to the show as Boomer Nirvana. Fritz and Wheezy are boomers. And so many of the guests that we've had on the show are people that were huge for boomers when they were growing up.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to listen to. They've got stories upon stories, and then the people that they interview have a ton of stories too. I was listening to the Kelly Lang episode, and she was the first female anchor?
So Kelly Lang was the first female primetime news anchor on an NBC station. I believe it also could be in the LA market. So either one or both, but definitely for any NBC station. And it was KNBC it must have been the 70s or 80s. And she has great stories because she was in the business for many years before. So she's been in the business for decades. And before she became the anchor, she was also doing all sorts of other kind of reporting, trying to get her foot in the door. And she was what they called a copter girl, who was flying around in the helicopter reporting on what's going on Earth or whatever. And it's crazy because the way that we described the episode is that in her day when she was trying to when her career was just taking off, women in news were a novelty and they were treated that way. They dressed her up in these crazy spacesuit, latex outfits, and did these stunts or whatever, because that's what how you would utilize a woman in the news market. So, and it's crazy because we're so that's, at least that is in the past, and there's not that's not an issue for women in that business anymore. But diversity was not a thing when she was first working, and she just kind of blazed a trail, and it's amazing hearing her stories.
That's so cool. I feel like younger generations watch something like Anchorman the movie with Will Ferrell and they're like, well, that's just ridiculous. That's parody. But no, like this stuff was very real. So it's very cool that your podcast is kind of telling some of those stories of our LA hidden gems.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's so much there for all demographics, right? Like our show does target an older audience, but I think that like people of any generation can get some value from what we're offering, because there is so much. I mean, we've got 128 episodes, which is not nothing. But it's not like, some giant, volumes and volumes of audio, but there is so much packed into those 128 hours. It's like you get such an amazing worm's eye view, from all of these different like people in the industry who have just like seen, between everyone that we've interviewed, like they've literally seen it all. And like I feel so privileged. Before we go on, I know like we want to talk about the full Monty, but I just want to share like a quick story that like will always stay with me, which is when we interviewed Pat Boone. And I was just thinking about this the other day because it was Harry Belafonte's birthday. And Pat Boone used to like host one of those like variety shows in the 50s that was like sponsored by, I think it was Chevy. I want to say it was Chevy. And so he invited Harry Belafonte was like one of the biggest entertainers at the time. So he invited him on his show. And the sponsor was like, no, like we can't have an African American perform on your show because that's not going to fly. That's not going to help us sell cars in like Nebraska or whatever. And so Pat Boone was like, at first he was like, okay. And then he was like, you know what? He turned around and was like, you know what? I feel like I have to quit this show because it's called the Pat Boone Variety Hour or whatever, has my name on it. And yet like one of the biggest entertainers, one of my close friends that like I would love to have on the show is like not allowed to be on. And so he's like, respectfully, like, this is not the Pat Boone show and I have to quit. And the reason that this is like, it stayed in my mind is because like Harry Belafonte's still alive. He just turned like 96 or 97. And it was like in his lifetime that this kind of blatant racism was happening. And so it's just like, these are like really important stories that like they're like pop culture kind of, histories, but they are so important to like the rest of our, our world. And yeah, I just feel like really privileged to be able to like interact with all these people all the time.
Yeah, that's an awesome story.
It's a great story. Know your history.
It reminds me of this Dr. John story. He was playing down in New Orleans and he got arrested for basically performing with an African American musician. So, like, they hadn't repealed all the segregation laws. Like, they had forgotten, like, oh, we forgot to repeal being able to play on the same stage as a black person. So he got arrested, and I think like they broke his finger, and I think it permanently damaged like some nerves in his hand. But he still told the cops, he's like, I guess you're gonna see me next week because Ray Charles is in town.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, that, and to think of like, usually if I were ever to be arrested, I'd probably be scared out of my mind. But for him to have like such a like smart remark, like, guess you're gonna be back here next week because Ray Charles is in town.
Right. Yeah. That's badass. I love that.
All right, so today we are going to talk about the 1997 Peter Cattaneo film, The Full Monty. So why are we talking about The Full Monty today, Dina?
So this was one of my favorite movies when I was in my teens. I mean, what, like 17-year-old girl doesn't love a movie about middle-aged British steel workers naked so that they can hold on to their kids? And I just love this movie. I saw it like a million times when it was still in the theater. I couldn't get enough of it, and I love the soundtrack. I owned the soundtrack on cassette, and I lived in New York City at the time, and I was always walking around Manhattan listening to my Full Monty soundtrack, and it just really, the entire thing, the movie, the music, everything just really like resonated with me, because I think it's kind of like a really universal story. And I think or like has, themes that are relatable to everyone. And the music just does such a great job of like, supporting the story.
Yeah, it's a really charming and distinctly British little indie movie, right? And I feel like on the topic of knowing your trailblazers and your forebears and what came before you, children, this is what we had before Magic Mike and Magic Mike XXL, right? Like before that story, we had the Full Monty. We had Chippendales, which inspired the cast or the characters in the Full Monty to kind of decide to get a bunch of money doing the striptease, because the movie is about out of work steel workers in like northern Britain who need to bootstrap up, and they decide to strip because Chippendales are doing it, and they figure that's a way to make a lot of money, but they're not, dancers. Understatement.
That's a great way to summarize the film. Yeah, that's basically it. Definitely not dancers, like except for Gerald Arthur Cooper,
But he's
the
not that
old
kind of dancer.
right. He's a traditional ballroom dancer who takes dance classes with his wife, but he does teach them all some moves.
This movie stars an actor named Robert Carlyle, who a lot of people know better as Begbie, the sort of murderous thug from Trainspotting. And so in this movie, he plays, like a similar working class character, but a dad and a lot less scary. So you can kind of see how like this maybe like led to that other thing. But he actually is really great in this. I feel like he is like sort of the epitome of like British working class hero, and you end up really liking him and finding him like very charming, even though he fucks up for 2 hours.
Yeah, he's a pretty big loser.
He really is, but then you kind of like him. You can't help but sympathize with him, even though he is consistently fucking up.
Yeah, definitely the lovable loser. Absolutely. And then you have Mark Addy, who plays his best friend, Dave, whose last name, the character's last name is like
Horseful.
Horseful, which somehow I never like registered until I rewatched the movie this week. I did rewatch it one time, like a few years ago, but like I said, I've seen it a million times. And Horseful, I never got that until this week. So I'm like, okay, I guess you learned something new. You could be almost 41 years old, and you just learned like the name of the character on your favorite movie. But so Dave, it's what's cool about the Dave and Gaz dynamic is that they're both kind of losers, but they have like their loserdom is like expresses itself differently in Dave versus Gaz. So you kind of have like you have a range of issues that make between the two of them. It becomes like a very relatable like situation, because it's like if you don't have a problem that like Gaz has, like maybe you have a problem that Dave has.
Yeah, and I think they're all kind of connected because they're victims of the same economic circumstances. That they're all unemployed and in one form or another, down on their luck through kind of no fault of their own, but more because of the climate that they're in this really depressing, British town of Sheffield they're now out of work in. There's no more industry. They've got to figure that out. If you only know one clip from this movie, it's probably the part of the movie where they're in the unemployment line and they're kind of casually like dancing to Hot Stuff by Donna Summer.
Like the most iconic, probably, other than maybe like the dancing at the end, the actual like striptease at the end, that scene is definitely like it's it's on another level.
Yeah, I like to watch trailers for these movies just for fun, just to kind of get reacquainted. And for one, like 90s trailers are just bad, like so bad compared to trailers today. But, they were smart enough to stick that scene in because obviously in the trailer they can't show like the striptease part because, ratings and all that stuff. And you don't want to, spoil the climax of the film. But they knew to stick that in at the end. And how can you not want to laugh at that, I was also in my teens when this movie came out. I don't think I saw it in theaters because as a teenage boy, it's hard to convince your other teenage boy friends that we should watch this movie about male strippers without
Honestly
being
ironic
ridiculed.
though, because it's like the whole movie is kind of about these guys that are finding like friendship with each other, even though they're super emotionally stunted and have like no clue how to do that. By the end of the
Right.
movie, they're all
But the trailer didn't tell me that this would be about male friendship.
right. The trailer doesn't really do that for you. The trailer is more like, hey, here's some very pasty British guys that are going to take their clothes off. Hey, Rick from Homeroom, you want to go to that? Probably.
Yeah, like I remember going like, "Oh, this looks funny," but it was also like, I don't know how to ask my friends to go watch this movie.
Well, as someone who was in the theater many times, I have to say the majority of the other patrons who were there with me were probably much older women, like women of a certain age, because I think that was like the audience at that time for that genre of like British indie movie that was kind of like maybe I can't remember if this was in full wide release or if I had to go to like some sort of like special like art house theater or whatever to see it. I know that it eventually made its way to the $3 theater in Manhattan, but now I can't remember what theater I saw the full Monty in. But yeah, definitely like teenage boys were not, I didn't see many in the theater with me.
Probably not the target demo. It's so
No.
fair. I also, when I was rewatching the film this week, because I hadn't seen it in many, many years, I was thinking about how this kind of kicked off a slate of very similar, oh, look, it's British people doing like naughty things.
Right. Yeah.
There's this movie from 2003. It's called Calendar Girls, and it's kind of a similar story where Helen Mirren and this group of other like very proper British women decide to make a naked calendar to raise money for like a cancer center. Does anyone remember that but me?
Yes, absolutely.
Real.
You're absolutely right that is the full Monty was sort of like the blueprint for movies like that. Yeah.
It was very zeitgeisty, the full Monty. It was a very big deal at the time. It was
Yeah.
such a big deal that it actually won the BAFTA for Best Picture. It beat LA Confidential for Best Picture. It was released in the same year that Titanic was released, I think. Is that
It
right?
outgrossed Jurassic Park
I mean,
in England.
right? The sequel to these are big numbers for just like a teeny tiny little film that people that are younger maybe don't remember, but it was a huge moment. Had a big moment.
It was. And just like as someone who was watching a lot of indie movies in the 90s, like I was like a stupid like movie snob. I'm not like that anymore. I'll watch anything and whatever. Like there's no movie that I'm like, "Oh my God, that's like, nothing's beneath me." Like I love movies and I've seen everything since those years. But back then I was young and I was like, oh, I only watched like the indies. But independent movies at that time were dark. Most independent movies were really like they left you with a pretty heavy feeling. Like I'm just like trying to remember the movies from like the late 90s that I were kind of like contemporaneous with the Full Monty. I can think of like the Adam Ugoyan movie Felicia's Journey, um, In the Company of Men, starring that guy that looks like Thomas Jane, and like for some reason I can never hold his name in my head, but maybe we'll figure it out before the end of the show. And what else was like, I mean, these movies were like really, really dark, and they kind of like were meant to like disturb and upset you.
Yeah,
Like that was
kids.
like the filmmakers, kids,
Yeah,
sure, yeah, that's a perfect example of that. These movies were like intended to like, make you feel bad. And then you have a movie like this that is like, I allowed myself to watch because I'm like, oh, it's foreign technically and like independent. And it's like such a feel good movie. Like you just feel happy every time, like there's nothing like it. To this day, I haven't seen a movie that quite has that like magic and charm.
that's
So
very.
it was nice. It was nice to have that break in like all like the sad, upsetting movies.
Yeah, it's a really great point of context. It's not upsetting. It's not gritty. It's like very charming and wholesome. And despite the concept is actually like, yeah, very sort of weirdly family friendly. Not super family friendly. Depends on your
Is
family.
it Aaron Eckhart that you're thinking
Yeah,
of?
that's him. Yes. I don't know why. I can't remember his name ever.
Before we continue with our episode, here's a word from our sponsor.
Enjoy listening to podcasts and ever wonder, can I make a podcast? But it seems so complicated, and good audio production can take time. What if there was a way to create an amazing podcast easily? Well, now there is. Introducing Podcasting Made Easy from Podtastic Audio. My production team will handle your entire audio production, allowing you to be the star of your show. This is Podcasting Made Easy. How easy? Well, so easy, you don't even have to press record. Now that's easy. Your listeners are waiting. Let's deliver. Sign up for a free strategy call today at podtasticaudio.com/easy.
But yeah, I think to go sort of full circle to the charm of this movie, one of the charms of this movie, I think, rests in how they use the music and how this really like disco, bright party music from the 70s it seems to kind of liven up this really dreary town. So it's kind of like a cool use of it. Like I don't always get down with like jukebox songs in soundtrack use, but I feel like here it's amazing. You dance with it.
So I actually had this like fantasy of like, I'm just gonna like just put it all out there. Of like, because I had seen this movie so many times in theater, I was like imagining like a world where like you do like you Rocky Horror Picture Show, the full Monty, because there's so much music and dancing, and you can sing along to a lot of these songs if you want to, but it's just, and like so many things that you could do to like interact back with the movie if you wanted to, and I'm just like, this is like a missed opportunity to
Yeah.
like in the theater. I just thought that would be like so cool.
I'm with you. Why? Maybe it's a thing somewhere in the UK and we just don't know it. Yeah, I think one of my favorite, it's sort of a jukebox moment, and it's also like a movie within the movie, weird self-referential moment. They're trying to learn to dance, and so they're sitting around watching the iconic scene from Flashdance, where she's the main character in Flashdance is supposed to be a steel worker,
Mhm.
and one of the guys who actually is a steel worker in the full Monty is like, well, she's doing it all wrong. It's like way
Right.
too much. This isn't steel work. And they're like, no, like we're trying to dance. And it's all set to like, What a Feeling, or whatever that song is from Flashdance. Like
Irene
the track from Flashdance is very fun.
Written by Giorgio Moroder.
There you go. It's not a striptease.
Trivia here. I love that scene. It's so funny. When I was watching the movie this week, rewatching it, I was still laughing my butt off at it. And my favorite thing is like the callback a little bit later when he's just Dave and Gary are having a conversation, and Gary says like, you can dance as well as the girl from Flashdance or whatever. And Dave says, well, I can definitely weld better than her.
Yeah, it's so great.
He won't let it go.
He's fixated on like her lack of welding skills, which is fine.
And it's such a perfect, the whole like commentary is so perfect because of course that's what he's going to be like more focused on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hope my chair is not too creaky.
Oh no, you're good. There are also a couple of songs on this soundtrack that feel very distinctly British, like to the extent where I feel like if you're a British semi-indie film or indie film, you have to have them in your movie. So like Rock and Roll Part 2, Gary Glitter is in this.
Very problematic.
Who is problematic.
Yeah, problematic.
97, right? Nobody knew in 97?
That song used to be like the goal song for so many hockey teams.
Right.
It was like the ultimate jock jam.
His whole jock jam. No, we can't jock jam to it because it's way too gross.
But the Joker can jock jam to it.
Right. But that song and Make Me Smile, Come Up and See Me by Cockney Rebel, which is also in the Velvet Goldmine soundtrack. I feel like if you are like in a working class area of England or something, and that's like where you're setting your film, you have to have these two tracks.
Also, the song Je t'aime, I think it's called Je t'aime. Now I can't remember because my full Monty cassette tape is like long gone. And it's hard to find online. It's hard to find the list online. I'm not sure if that song was on the actual soundtrack, but it's definitely in the movie. And I feel like so many British movies, maybe even like to this day, if there's like a scene that involves like sex, love, like sensuality, something like that song has to be in there.
It's super funny to me because like Je t'aime, Moi non plus by Serge Gainsborough and Jane Birkin, it's kind of like the almost like parody level, like quintessential like sexy French song, which is so far like from what these British characters are, and understand that the contrast is like almost uncomfortable.
Right, exactly. It's actually not on the soundtrack, but
yeah,
just pretty prominent in the movie.
Yeah, but actually, I mean, that scene was kind of amazing where it was that when it was playing, it was a former steel worker or whatever, who was auditioning for them, and he just was like in so much pain, like trying to like remove his clothes, that they had to stop him because they could tell that he just like didn't want to do this and just trying this out, like out of desperation. So that was really, and that contrast, right? Like Nicole, you were saying, like between this song that is just like over the top, like an expression of, you know, sensuality that is you're just supposed to like fully, like, you know, enjoy yourself, like listening to. And then you have this like horrible like visual of like a man who's just like suffering, like trying to get through this.
He's so uncomfortable and so far out of his depth. And this song is playing, and it's just, you like cringe for him. You're like, I don't want to get him out of this situation. But I think that's kind of how anybody would feel if they were put like under a spotlight and that song was playing and you had to perform to it, because it's super over the top. Too much. So good song choice.
Right. Yeah. That was a bad. Yeah.
Fitting.
I love that for a stripper audition, some guy is a guy who was like, I'm going to do the Donald O'Connor thing from Singing in the Rain.
Oh, yes. That's his like gimmick.
And it's like, for what? Do you know what you're auditioning for? And you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do that thing from Singing in the Rain, and then not do it. That's Hugo Spear, right?
Yes. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Apparently he has some conduct issues, which means he will not be returning for this Full Monty continuation series.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, I don't know too much about him in general, but Spear was removed from the series due to inappropriate conduct claims.
That stuff's
But yeah, I just love that this Sheffield guy is like, I'm going to do this thing from Singing in the Rain. I was like, I did not expect a Singing in the Rain reference in this movie.
Well, it's so cool how there's like something from like every genre of music and dancing that is like somehow represented in this movie, which is like why, it's like why music is such an important part of the movie. And made so much sense that they made it into a musical, which I would actually love to see maybe one day. Because that's probably a lot of fun.
Yeah.
um, yeah. But so when I was reading about the film Monty, like reading some background. So Anne Dudley was the composer. She created the original score. She actually won the Oscar for best original score for a comedy or musical for this movie. She actually got the Oscar, and she was saying that like the original composition was inspired by this idea of like having all these guys who are different men from different backgrounds, and like all of like the different instruments, like the harmonica, the baritone sax, like all of this stuff. They were like all different, but like when you hear them all together, it all makes sense. And so that's kind of like the whole soundtrack, like I see that way. Like there's so many like it's every kind of different sort of music, but it all kind of makes sense when you throw it all together. Like it somehow is just like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that in 1997 they had two score categories. They had best
Hmm.
original score for like comedies and musicals, and then best original score for dramas.
Mhm.
Yeah, I found that really weird too. I don't know when they dropped that other category, but yeah, it was interesting. And apparently her win is like a little bit was a little bit controversial because people felt it wasn't necessarily like a very forward score. It's like an underscore that you don't necessarily like register strongly when you watch the film, but I feel like it's effective in that it carries the story, right? Which is what you want, is something that supports the action.
Exactly. I think she did an amazing job. And by the way, she also did the film score for American History X
Oh wow.
and Say Anything.
Wow.
Oh, and The Crying Game.
Wow.
So she's incredibly accomplished. And I think that the criticism she received for this was not fair, because she did an amazing job, I think, of, like you said, Nicole, like not, kind of overshadowing the the narrative, and just kind of like providing like a beautiful like foundation where this for the story to unfold. And it's so recognizable to me. Like, I mean, I've seen the movie many times, but like I love that. To me, kind of harken back to a kind of, there's sort of like a mid-century sound to her composition. And but it was but kind of like a little, like muted, and it was like perfect to me, because it's like she wanted to give a little bit of like the heyday of Sheffield, right, which was like in the 70s, but then like remind you that, things are like not that good right now. So like it's like you take that sound of like the golden time of the city, but then you kind of like bring it down a little to like reflect like the current situation.
Yeah, I love the way that you explain that. I feel like that's correct, right? Is that she did something that was very representative of the time and place, and that sort of, like lifted the emotions of the characters, as opposed to being, parts of the soundtrack which are meant to be a little bit more showy and representative of like the musical numbers and the live performances, and that
Exactly.
contrast of like, oh, look at all these guys like finding joy again, which is really nice. Like accepting themselves. A lot of like really nice themes in this, actually.
Yeah, it's
It's a
beautiful.
journey. It's a journey of men like coming to grips with feelings.
Yeah, I mean, and these are men who are going through a crisis of like identity, and, like some of the worst things that anyone can go through, right? Like Gerald hasn't told his wife in like 6 months that he's, been unemployed. Dave, like, can't get it up in the bedroom because, you know, of his like body issues. Gary can't see his son. It's like all of these men, and then like the overarching theme of like, you know, the more like widespread like unemployment that like everyone is dealing with. You know, and I think what makes this movie so great is that men aren't allowed, and certainly not in the 90s, like not at this time, to be vulnerable and to like show emotion and to admit that they're going through a hard time and ask for help and stuff. And to see that, you know, I think that's what makes Magic Mike so successful, is that like you see vulnerability in men, which is like, we're just so grateful. We're all grateful. Like we've all suffered so much from like toxic masculinity. We're just grateful to see like some like authentic emotion. It's like a beautiful thing to see.
And it's easy to diminish or to dismiss a movie like The Full Monty or a movie like Magic Mike as being frivolous or being, you know, kind of lightweight entertainment. But I actually think this, in a comical way, deals with some really serious themes. And for 1997 was a really deep exploration of male friendship and the way guys deny, you know, kind of like their emotions. And just the idea of like these like kind of hyper traditional masculine guys like being able to be this vulnerable, as you said, is like kind of cool. There's something like very like rebellious about this movie.
Yeah, that is really, really well said.
It does a
Rebellious.
really good job balancing the darkness, as we were talking about in independent films. Like there is some dark undercurrents to this film, but in like a pretty digestible way. Like, you know, we have people repossessing your belongings because you're unemployed. We have, you know, not being able to come up with, you know, the child support to be able to see your son, you know, and the potential of losing custody of him, right? You have someone who's trying to kill themselves in the beginning of the film.
Right.
Right, yeah. And there's also a very sweet romantic story there too between
Guy.
Lomper and who is the his name is Guy. Okay, yeah. So weird that I don't. You know, it's really interesting that like I was thinking about this like after this last time that I watched this. The individual characters to me, even though like I love this movie and I was like like low key obsessed with it at one point in my life, the individual characters are like, except for like the very memorable presence of Dave and Gary, like don't really matter as much as like the ensemble. It's all about the ensemble cast and how they work together. I think that's kind of like the overarching like theme of this movie, is that it's about these different people all who, when they come together, like something incredible and magical happens.
Yeah, and I think it's such a kind of rich tapestry of these like Sheffield characters that it is very much like a true ensemble, except for like the couple of main characters that you do get like a deeper dive into like their motivations and their lives. The rest of it is just kind of like this really wonderful color. Even the characters that get like two lines, I want to know more about them. Like the
Yeah.
ladies that they go up to initially with the flyers about doing the strip show and telling them like, oh yeah, it's going to be the full Monty, that's why it's different than Chippendales, are like so funny. They're so great.
If there's one thing that I could say that is like not so great about this movie, is that there's not a lot of well-developed female characters. Not really anyone other than potentially Dave's wife, because the story that they have to tell about Dave kind of like requires the wife to also be like a pretty like relatively well developed character, so that, you know, there's some interaction there. But a lot of the women are painted as kind of like the enemy, right, of like these working class men. And so it's sad. Like it's mildly like upsetting to me when I'm watching the movie now. But you know, that's kind of like, that's the story that they were telling at the time, right? They were trying to tell they were trying to tell the story of like what they saw happening, and that was like how, you know, maybe that's like realistic, like to these men really did see most women in their lives as like, you know, not their partner. not an equal or whatever, but like, the two women that are like, they're coming to the show with scissors or whatever. And like the ex-wife who's like not sympathetic or understanding to her husband who lost his job. And like like the women in the beginning who like go into the bathroom and they're like kind of painted as like harpies or whatever. So that's a shame, but I mean, I think we just have to like understand that that was the time.
Yeah, a lot of movies in the 90s, and I would argue like early 2000s, which is like an extension of the 90s, is they're very much like two-dimensional female characters, not oriented around female agency at all.
Yeah, and I covered the Wild Wild West movie with Will Smith for a different podcast, and I was like, man, this movie really hates women. Like that movie, there's even less depth to them, and they're all wearing like some sort of like corset. And it's like, okay, like this is really bad. The full Monty, the full Monty is like Little Women compared to the Wild Wild West.
So the Wild Wild West is the movie with Will Smith and Kevin Kline, right?
Yes.
Because also, like, kind of interestingly, that movie called A Million Ways to Die in the West, that was made by Seth MacFarlane. That was like the most like blatantly written pick me female role that I have ever seen in my entire life. Charlize Theron's character in that movie, I don't know if you guys have seen it or remember it, but it was like insane. Like, okay, like, did you get picked or what? Like, I couldn't believe, like, halfway through that movie, I was like, I never want to watch movies again. It almost like ruined me.
Yeah. So I do feel like the women are underdeveloped in this film for sure, but in the 90s, like this is not that bad.
By 90s standards, it's not that bad, and at least I feel like they're treated with a modicum of respect, and there is kind of this like pervading idea in the film that the women have it together and that know like what the hell is up, and these men are just kind of bumbling through their various existences trying to get it.
Yeah, and the ex-wife kind of comes around, right? She shows up at the end and has a good time and brings the son and won't let her new love come with because obviously that would make things super uncomfortable. But like there's that small little like, all right, like let's see what he's up to. Let's have a good time with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's a happy ending there for everyone, right? And that's kind of like but it's sort of like the ending to me is like kind of like bittersweet, right? Because it's like, first of all, like you've just spent like an hour and a half with these characters and you kind of like love them and love the world that they've created for you to like hang out in, and now it's like over. And that always like makes me like a little sad. And then so I think it's also cool though that they're making a show that is going to have all the original characters, because I'm like, I've always wanted to know, right? Like what happens after the clothes come off? Like what's next for these characters?
Yeah, the ending is abrupt, like for those that don't remember the ending or maybe not familiar with it. So they get to this climactic performance where they're supposed to show the full Monty and be like fully nude. And the whole thing is done to this Tom Jones cover of Randy Newman's song, You Can Leave Your Hat On. I see what they did there. So you see them, is such a classic 90s thing. You see them get naked from behind and you see their like, like pale nude butts, but you don't see the front. And then it like freeze frames on like their butts, like they did it, and then it ends. It's kind of the ending.
And it's pretty clear that this performance is like a one-time only thing. Like this is not like, oh, now this is our new business. Like it's like, all right, we're going to be able to do this once and then we're going to have to like figure out our shit afterwards. So it's like a small victory.
Right. That is, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, Ryan, because that is also kind of like what makes it sort of like a bittersweet thing, because you're like, okay, like that was fun. Like that was a great time for these characters and like a moment they'll remember for the rest of their lives. But now it's just got to get serious and they have to like really, deal with the issues that they've been kind of contending with in this movie.
They went for the super happy ending to like co-op from Wayne's World. Like, it's the super happy ending, right? And we're not going to see any of like the potential fallout or reconciling with all the things that you guys have like done for the past 2 hours and how that's actually going to work out.
Yeah, like it's gonna pay for like 3 months of child support. For,
Seemed like they would
Gaz,
need
you know?
money. Like, yeah, I don't know. I was, this is because I'm me and like going through the economics of the situation. I'm like, I wonder how much they actually made for like a one night. Is this really going to be as lucrative as they think? How much were these tickets?
At the end, when they're like probably counting their money, and they're like, wait a minute.
Split it like 7 ways, plus pay for the venue, you know?
Right. The kid gets some because he's like basically like management for
Right.
them.
because he's bankrolling this thing.
Right? He gets a cut. He gets his $100 back.
One thing that kind of bugged me about watching the movie this week was it's like, why are we doing so much striptease in front of family? Right? Because Horse is like, yeah, there's all my nieces here, and it's like, why?
I know. I had that same kind of like, ugh, it's not great. And I mean, they do acknowledge it. Like family services does get involved at one point. They do kind of like get caught red-handed with having kids on the premises as they're doing their, you know, like pre-show, like their test run for like a bunch of elderly women. And then they got hauled off like to the police station and everything. So it's like, it does have its moment. Like they do try to address it, but it's heavily awkward. The way that I like, my takeaway from it was like, they're just so clueless that it doesn't even really enter into their orbit that like, oh yeah, this is maybe not appropriate.
Right. Yeah.
And it's kind of that, maybe that's also the only people that they have to ask.
Exactly. Yeah. But they're not like, it's not like they're experienced in any kind of like entertainment, you know, anything in like of that nature. So they're like, well, how about grandma? Like, it just like doesn't occur to them to like, and they're not really like fully comfortable yet, you know, even like in front of each other, like much less strangers. So I guess they just kind of let Horace, you know, invite who he was going to invite. And then they're all like kind of so busy, worried about their own like shortcomings and issues that it sort of like preoccupies them a lot. And they're not like sitting there like, let's make a plan. And like, you know, what's like the rehearsal schedule? Because like Gerald is afraid that he's going to get a hard on like during his performance. And then Dave is, you know, worried about like how people are going to perceive him. And, you know, everyone's got like their own thing that is like they're dealing with. And kind of like the way that it all sort of like haphazardly falls together, I think is part of like the journey, part of the fun.
It's very haphazard, and that is what makes it fun, right? They're just kind of like ping-ponging around and being these total fish out of water. It kind of gives me the same vibes as Little Miss Sunshine when Little Miss Sunshine does the performance to Rick James' Super Freak. And she just kind of doesn't know, and like her grandpa didn't tell her, like maybe people are going to take that wrong. Like it feels fairly innocent the way that it's played in the movie.
Yeah, that was hilarious. You're so right. That's a good analogy. By the way, apparently the people at the final performance, the people in the club, so they hired extras. There's like 50 extras, and they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know that there was going to be full nudity from these guys. So like when you see the reactions at the end from people other than like from the extras other than like the cast members that are there, like the wives and everything, that's like a real reaction to what they're seeing.
Macy, it's genuine.
Yeah.
Isn't there some sort of liability with that? Like
right?
if you're gonna see like naked people, you have to like tell people,
right? What kind of waivers did they
have? Is that legal?
You're a producer. What kind of waivers did they have to sign?
They probably signed something.
Yeah, like I think even if you were to get people from central casting, like I think you have to be like, there's gonna be like some nudity in the scene. I don't think you could just be like push them onto set and be like, go.
Maybe they told them nudity, but they didn't tell them the full Monty was going to happen. Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? We'll never know. It's lost to history. It seems like they came out okay. Also, I just want to note that if you want to hear the word like Willie 1,000 times, this is the movie for you. I was like really obsessed for a brief hot minute with listening to audio clips from Prince Harry's memoirs, Spare, because they're ridiculous, first of all, but like his British accent sounds like Gordon Ramsay to me. And so it's like him like talking about his Todger, which is Todger is apparently slang for your thing.
It sounds pretty nasty. It sounds like more upscale than Willie.
Yeah.
Well, he was a royal, so you know he has to use the proper slang.
Isn't that crazy though?
Can't use Sheffield slang.
Right? Not Willie. It's not Willie. Although
that's not proper.
Other Willie, which is a whole other situation. Anyway.
Well, that Willie is quite a Todger.
The point of this is that British people have some very like colorful words for their genitals.
Yeah, and I'll give a piece of unsolicited advice. So lately, like my whole thing, just in general, when I'm watching anything on TV, I always put the subtitles on, the captions, because it just makes me like, I don't know, it's like it's so easy to miss stuff.
Yeah.
And I just feel like I'm more like fully involved if I see like the captions come up. So this movie is a great opportunity to use your captions if you're not like an avid caption user like I am, because you will literally like understand. There's like half of the movie that you may not get because of the very specific, not just the very specific slang, but the fact that they have pretty heavy accents. You know, it's not quite as bad as Trainspotting. I think I understood like maybe 20% of Trainspotting the first time that I saw it, like understood like the words that were being said. But definitely like it's a lot better with the captions.
So much better. I also pay a lot more attention with captions. And so it's nice when you're watching something like The Full Monty or Letterkenny or Trainspotting.
Oh, yeah.
You're just trying to like get past to like these really colorful phrases because they're actually freaking amazing, but you have to understand them first.
And they're just packing so many like jokes into a very short amount of time.
Yeah, and it's a rapid fire sort of delivery in a lot of places in this film too. So it's like Trainspotting in that way. Robert Carlyle's character, at least in this film, is like pretty clear when he speaks, and not like his Begbie character in Trainspotting, where you have no fucking idea, and that's kind of part of the fun. Nobody knows what he's saying. Even the other Scottish people are like, I don't know, because his accent is so thick.
Yeah, you might need
That was like Colin Farrell 20 years ago.
Yeah, so captions are the way to go. Also helps me put my phone down. If I'm like I'm saying to myself like, okay, like I'm gonna be like paying attention to the subtitles, it kind of like is a step towards like removing my phone from the situation.
Are there clues of the Loomper guy love story that I miss earlier in the film before they get together?
Because it seems very quick, right? You're like, wait, but did they?
I think that like if you're really paying attention, you can see like some glances they exchange, and like a certain way like Guy like teases Lumper at one point, or he's like, you have like saggy titties or whatever, which he like doesn't really, it's just a way for him to like kind of interact with him or whatever. Right. And yeah, like you can see, I mean, maybe like watching it already knowing what's going to happen, like maybe that's something that's like more clear, but you can definitely see like some sparks like flying between them.
Yeah, and I always wonder too, like that, how much of that got cut or censored potentially, because this was 1997 and having a gay relationship in your film was maybe not the most desirable thing from the movie studio, which sucks, but that's probably it's got to be part of it, right? Because that's another one of those storylines where it's like, I wish that had gone so much further. I want to know more about it.
Yeah, that's probably true. They probably like really underplayed it and just kind of hinted at it because they didn't want to like upset anyone or whatever.
Totally. And like for the time, it's actually a really bold choice, especially when you're considering like the setting is this working class part of England with a lot of racism and homophobia and things that maybe we are not as cognizant of or that we take for granted now. But you can see how they were trying to subvert that in a lot of the themes and stories in this film, which is cool.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, they condense it to a very svelte 91 minutes.
Yeah, it always goes by fast for me. Although I think it's really well paced, actually. I think like the pacing is and like the evenness of it is like one of the great features of this movie. But it's just kind of like it's never like quite enough. I just want to like spend more time with the characters and like in this world.
Yeah, I love this for a series. I'm really curious to see how the reboot, continuation, whatever it is, series comes together. I think that could have a lot of potential and be really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to learn more about Horse's life and what his situation at home looks like.
Right?
Because we don't really learn a whole lot about him.
No, and he has the best intro during the sort of casting portion where they're doing auditions for the show. And you're like super intrigued by him and he's like very cool. And then they never really get deeper into that. So on the flip side, I kind of miss movies that are a little bit short and not like testing me with like a 4-hour runtime.
Oh yeah, that was great. I was like 91 minutes, perfect.
Perfect, because it is very well paced, like you said. It's just, the pacing is there and you're invested the entire time and satisfying resolution. Great film.
Yeah, especially for a movie that is nominated for like Best Picture. Like rarely do you get like something under 2 hours.
This is the BAFTA Best Picture, okay?
Higher grossing than Jurassic Park.
Beat LA Confidential. I just want people to understand what we're working with.
Made for $3.5 million and grossed 230.
Right.
And I'm just kind of like, I'm so curious about Peter, what's his name? Cattaneo, the director, because he did not like, he won an award. He won like MTV's like Best New Filmmaker or something like that, the MTV Movie Awards. And, this movie is amazing. He didn't really do anything after this. Like the most notable of his works following the Full Monty is The Rocker, the 2008 Rainn Wilson vehicle, which is okay. It's also like, it has like some similarities, cute little, setback to success, kind of like music based, feel good comedy, I guess. And it's definitely like worth a watch, right? If like someone hasn't seen it, but it's not anything groundbreaking. And that's really like the most famous movie that he did after this. So what happened?
Yeah, why did he fall off? Such a strong start.
Well, it looks like he followed up the Full Monty with something called Lucky Break.
Mm-hmm. It's like a prison escape movie.
But like a musical?
Oh, was it a musical? All right, yeah. I mean, that's on brand, I guess.
Yeah, Stephen Fry wrote lyrics for it. I have no idea what this movie is. I'm just looking at the Wikipedia for it.
I mean, it also could be one of those situations where he works, across the pond, but he doesn't have the same notoriety stateside. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah. I'm always amazed by like celebrity and the level of celebrity in the UK that like we barely know here.
Right.
Hey, yeah. And they like are really obsessed with their celebrities.
According to Rotten Tomatoes, Lucky Break fails to do anything new with the Full Monty formula. 48% on Metacritic, 48% on Metacritic, and 40% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it doesn't seem like it did very well, and perhaps that tanked his career. He did some, TV stuff, but even that, it was like 2 episodes here, 4 episodes here.
Wow, that's pretty sad. That's
rough.
pretty bleak. He tried to like recreate the magic of Full Monty and never succeeded.
Maybe it just got too big maybe the pressure was too much, because I think when you do create something that is right out the gate, like first major thing that you've done, and it blows up like this, that's got to be hard. It's the second album problem, right? Which I
Yeah, it's
guess,
like the guy who did Chronicle, and then they gave him the Fantastic Four, and he was going to get a Star Wars movie, and he just
right. And then it's like, oh, that sucks, right?
right, like it was just too much all at once. The most successful, or I don't know if sorry, I don't know if I should consider this the most successful, but he did a show called Rev. This was in 2010 to 2014, and that was 19 episodes, so at least that got some run. Olivia Colman was in it.
Oh.
And Tom Hollander. So, I mean, I think he's doing fine, even though he may not be a household name.
All right. So I won't lose any sleep worrying about Peter Cattaneo's career.
Yeah, I mean, if he is unemployed, he can consider taking up stripping.
Well, I don't know. He kind of lost the whole magic of the full Monty, according to that review.
By the way, really quick, the TV show Hung, the HBO TV show Hung, sort
with
of
Thomas Jane.
That one is with Thomas Jane. That is kind of the same idea as at least Gaz's storyline in the Full Monty. He needs his kids back, so he does something like that requires nudity. And that was a great show. It lasted 3 seasons.
Yeah, I think I didn't get to it because I didn't have HBO at the time, but I know people that were really into it.
It was pretty good. There was a lot of the cool, like, sort of like almost groundbreaking things about it, like the way that it addressed like female sexuality. I thought there was a lot of great stuff going on in that show. And also it was cool because it's set in Detroit. And my husband's from Detroit, and we had just gone to, he just took me there to visit for the first time ever, like right around the time that the show came out. And so it was kind of fun to watch it because it was like a slice of like Michigan.
What I was curious about, okay, so Dina, your headphones are on, it's 1997, you're running around New York, you have the Full Monty soundtrack playing on your cassette tape.
I'm getting a little misty-eyed.
Is it nostalgic for you? Is that like a very nostalgic moment in time?
Totally is. Like, I mean, it really like brings me back because so I was like in downtown New York. Like I went to school in like very close to where the World Trade Center was. And so I have this like distinct memory of like walking around like past like the Twin Towers and just like in that general area and just like listening to my various I've always loved soundtracks. Like most of my like cassette music collection, whatever, was soundtracks. And so like, listen, I distinctly have this memory of like a breezy day in April, like Irene Cara's What a Feeling comes on, and like the Twin Towers are like looming in front of me. Like it definitely like takes me back to that moment.
I love that so much. It's like, I know people overuse, like, it was a more innocent time, but it really does feel like that. Like, it's such a kind of like cool lo-fi, like we're all kind of 90s kids here, I feel like former 90s teens. So I feel that in my bones. I want to like go to a Tower Records.
Oh my God. Well, it was like Borders. So so there used to be a mall underneath the World Trade Center was like an underground mall. And my friends and I spent a lot of time there. There was like a variety of like different stores and like little restaurants and stuff. And there was a Borders there that I spent a lot of time in. And Borders was like for like a 90s teen, it was like what could freaking be better? Books of like all kinds and CDs. And then they had that thing where you could like listen to some of the CDs were like set up to listen to with like headphones. And then a pretty like clean, decent bathroom. And then you could also get coffee. I mean, it was like I lived there basically.
I also spent a lot of time at Borders.
Yeah, this is like speaking to like every fiber of my soul. That's where I spent all my time in high school. like all of it. It was a magical place for those that do not remember Borders. RIP. It was incredible.
I don't know if I ever bought anything from Borders, but I spent a lot of time at Borders.
Well, they had a mean cafe that, because this is kind of like pre-Starbucks era and pre having that like third place to hang out with. So if you're just like a surly teenager that needs something to do, they had a cafe that they would never kick you out of. Like you could stay at the Borders Cafe for 8 hours and nobody was going to call you on your bullshit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was like for a teenager, it was like so, I mean, and not just a teenager, like there was always like the cafe was like popping all the time. There was people reading books that, I doubt that they paid for. But they were just like hanging out. Everybody was like, it was just a freaking reading room. It was amazing. And they used to have a coffee drink at Borders that they called the Mocha Berry, which is a cafe mocha with raspberry syrup in it. And I had like a craving for it the other day. And so I went, don't come for me. But like Starbucks, like, I'm sorry, Starbucks is kind of mid. And like, I think we all live in Southern California, right? So for me, it's all about coffee bean, but I didn't think coffee bean had raspberry syrup. So I went to Starbucks and just was like fully disappointed.
So sad. I wish somebody would reboot Borders. If we can reboot the full Monty, can we not like make Borders the thing again? Like, I don't know. Like, forget like
we're rebooting Toys R Us, right?
Yeah, we're rebooting Toys R Us. Like, forget Blockbuster Video. Like, I need Borders again. Anyway, this is now a Borders Stan podcast.
Yeah, I will still not buy anything, but I would like a Borders.
So this soundtrack, do you have a favorite song on it that like something that stands out to you, or is your experience of listening to it like, no, I gotta listen to the whole thing front to back so that I can kind of relive the movie?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of that. Like, that's a big part of it is when I was listening to it, it was just like calling up like the same emotions, like the ups and downs that you get from watching the movie. And I think it's really hard for me to choose between the Tom Jones cover of You Can Keep Your Hat On and then Come Up and See Me. I feel like the Tom Jones cover just ekes out just like a little bit ahead because first of all, it's like Tom Jones. So like, just stop. Like, who can beat Tom Jones? Like, you can try, but it's going to be hard to beat Tom Jones. Doing a cover of a Randy Newman song, like, it's beautiful. But I love that scene that they play, like where they use Come Up and See Me, because it really is like this beautiful like montage of the guys like hanging out, and it's like a great like expression of, you get to see like their friendship kind of like blooming and them like growing closer to each other. Like that scene kind of like really captures that. So yeah, those are both like amazing songs, but I think Tom Jones probably wins.
Oh, and let me add on the Tom Jones cover. That was produced by Anne Dudley, who did the score.
Oh.
And they had worked before on a cover of Prince's Kiss in 1988.
Which is crazy to me, like that she just had this pre-existing relationship with Tom Jones. It is so perfect for this film. Like, of course it has to have some element of Tom Jones. Like, nobody represents throwing your panties at a stage better than Tom Jones.
Exactly.
And a middle-aged man, too.
Yeah, totally. It works.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, what's interesting is that the like climactic scene of the movie is all about the female gaze, right? Even though the story is about men, and like in this movie, men's lives and their experiences like stand in for like the human experience in general. Women don't really get a lot of time or any depth to speak of, but ultimately this is about what a woman wants to see. And it's so cool how like right before the ending stripper scene, there's this like incredible moment between Dave and Jeannie where he's like, who wants to see my fat ass up on stage? And she's like, I do. And it sort of is like, it's like the perfect way to lead into the ending, because like it's about like what like women, maybe like for a woman, it may be more important to see like authenticity from men, rather than necessarily like oiled up, like perfect pecs or whatever. Like, so that is, I think, such an incredible like statement.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that it works, that the climax works so well, is that none of these characters physically really change throughout the movie. Like I thought, you know, like they exercise and stuff, but no one is like noticeably different, right? Which is great with Dave's story, right? Because it would be kind of a letdown if like he got like super in shape for this, right? Like it has to be
Right.
he doesn't lose any weight, right? Like that's kind of why it works, right? Like they're all still the lovable losers. And I think the reason that everyone comes out and they're curious is because these are our boys. These are our Sheffield boys. We're going to watch our Sheffield boys do this.
Right. Yeah. It's like there's so much, you can see so much pride.
I love that insight that their bodies don't change. Like they do this whole workout montage, and he, the bigger guy puts like saran wrap around like his midsection and is trying
Yeah,
to
is
like.
that a real thing in the 90s? Was that a real way to lose weight? Or
Well, I
people
think
thought it was a real way to lose weight?
the 90s and like early 2000s were just like crazy body fascism. Like there's a lot of like you need to be like whittled down, even if it takes wearing like a trash bag suit and running for 10 miles and like eating green tea pills for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It was a weird time for bodies, but that's kind of why this movie is a little bit brave, right? Because it does discuss some things that I think maybe then we didn't have the language to articulate. So we weren't like as a culture talking about body positivity and self-acceptance and all this stuff that like is kind of commonplace now and that we feel comfortable having discussions around. We didn't feel comfortable having it then. And so they kind of took this like small town slice of life and made it into this really like affirming thing. It's kind of rebellious. I like that about this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're so right. There's nothing at that time that could have been more rebellious than just like allowing men to be like totally vulnerable and address like these issues that, men were not really supposed to be honest about, or like act like, this is not the stuff that concerned them.
I recently watched the Hulu series Chippendales with Kumail Nanjiani in it. It's kind of like the true story of all the like dark, weird stuff that went on with like the founding of Chippendales, which is a good series. But one of the things that it definitely like emphasizes, like, yeah, that somehow became like this idea of like physical perfection that was like really super important at that time. And then it got so big that it was like parodied on SNL, and you'd have Patrick Swayze as like the Chippendales dancer, and then Chris Farley as like, the parallel to that. And it's like played for laughs, right? Which kind of sucks. This movie, I think, like really tips a lot of that like on its head. So like same time frames, but doing much different work with the same cultural material.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Like whereas Chris Farley, was like, it was just supposed to be like a joke, right? Like, can you imagine like this fat guy dancing like at Chippendales? Like, isn't that funny? Haha. This is the polar opposite, where it's like, wait a minute, like, he might, like, a man with a certain type of body might feel a certain way about it, and like, let's talk about it. Let's like dive into that instead of like just laughing it off.
Yeah, it's not played as a joke at any point, really. It's because his wife loves him, and at the end, the big revelation is like, no, like she loves you the way that you are, and it's fine. It's not really what is important. So
Yeah, there's a lot of like really great dramatic moments that I think, maybe get like looked over because the premise is like kind of ridiculous. But every time that a character is allowed to talk about their personal issues, like when Gerald gets mad, when Gary and Dave like mess up his interview, and he like admits that he's been lying to his wife, like that moment is so emotional. And then the way the other characters are watching him like lose it, and like, it's an incredible dramatic moment. that is, you just like really deeply, it's like you feel it viscerally. And then, all of Dave's storyline, Gary looks so like heartbroken every time like something with Nathan is like causing a problem between them. It's just, I feel like the entire cast just really brought it. Like there's no like half-assed anything in this movie. They just really like fully put themselves out there.
It's very well acted. As a full-blown adult watching this for the first time in a very, very long time, I had a new appreciation for it because I actually kind of went into it thinking like, oh, it's more like a comedy, right? But no, it actually is like a really nice balance of comedy and drama, and it's rare. And I think maybe that's what people felt at the time. Like, oh, it really is like doing something different and special. It's a special movie.
It resonated with everyone because like, I think we all needed to experience that where it's like, let's just like admit that life is hard and that like we need a little bit of like, we need to bring in lightness. Like we need to, and like the way to do that is through like relationships.
And like levity and joy in a place where it's maybe not priority. And like having that these people dance to like You Sexy Thing by Hot Chocolate is amazing, right? Everyone should do that.
I'm telling you, we need a Rocky Horror style like screening of the full Monty where everyone's singing and dancing.
Now I like Ryan. Yeah, the double feature with Magic Mike. I really like that. I feel like somebody's got to do that.
Yeah, that's inspired by a friend of mine who lives up in San Francisco. And I think when Double XL came out, I was like, did you go opening night? And he was like, oh yeah, like me and my boyfriend and all like our crew, like I guess a bunch of like there was like, I don't know if it was like a group chat, like we're just gonna flood this one theater with just all gay men watching Magic Mike, and we're just gonna be like screaming at the screen the entire time. And I was like, that actually sounds like a lot of fun.
Actually sounds like the most fun, and I'm like sad that I wasn't there. Like, bring me to that screening. Where more of that, please.
So maybe when this TV show comes, maybe they can set up some screenings. Bring the movie back for like one weekend only or something.
Definitely.
Well, thank you, Dina, for coming on the show. I had a great time talking about the full Monty with you.
Thank you guys for having me. I had a lot of fun. This was a great conversation. And one more time, a little plug for Media Path Podcast. You can find us wherever podcasts are listened to. We're also on YouTube, and you can go to the website, mediapathpodcast.com, for all the links and info.
Very cool. And you can find us on Twitter and Instagram. Our Twitter handle is soundtrack_your, and SoundtrackCast is our Instagram handle. And you can find the Media Path Podcast wherever you're listening to this podcast.
One-stop shopping.
Thanks for joining us this week on Soundtrack Your Life. Make sure to visit our website, soundtrackyourlife.net, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too.